All right, let's see if me and technology can be friends for 10 minutes and not mess this up. All right, let's do a presentation on supplementation. Sodium bicarbonate, is it a legitimate ergogenic aid? Research articles that have been recently um, published would say yes, with a little caveat. It kind of depends on what type of exercise or sporting event you're doing and kind of what level of physiology you are. Like, are you super elite or not? How it's thought to work is basically when the sodium bicarbonate here, um, bicarbonate detaches, you basically have higher serum levels of bicarbonate, therefore delaying plasma acidosis or kind of in the tissue level acidosis. Thing we're not going to talk about, but that's kind of interesting to look at later, is all the sodium kind of bringing in a water retention and getting hyperhydration, which actually could be helpful for certain events, which would be kind of interesting to look how sodium bicarbonate may help in uh, really hot, humid conditions. So how the basic mechanism of action, how a lot of people have kind of explained how it works, is basically when the bicarbonate bonds to hydrogen atoms, you have the carbonic acid, weak acid, slower rate of acidosis or slower total acidosis, and things like PFK1 and the glycolysis pathway is not as diminished, and therefore you can kind of increase anaerobic glycolysis production of ATP. Therefore, you would mitigate your fatigue, and um, yeah, that's kind of a simple explanation, but that's apparently not all there is to it. Um, Basically, it's 27% sodium by dry weight, so taking 300 milligrams, like at my body weight here, we get about 5.7 grams of sodium. That's like taking like 15 grams of sodium bicarbonate as well. What most researchers do is either give a single bolus or like, hey, 1 to 2 hours before your training, um, try to take all of it by then. Sometimes they take it with food or without, just depending on GI effects. So we're going to look at my PICO question here. Basically, if supplementing with it compared to not supplementing it, will it improve anaerobic or aerobic measures of performance? Here's what I said earlier. Um, so what does research suggest? We have 3 articles here we're going to look at. The first one is a pretty cool CrossFit study. I think it was done in South America. And the good thing was what they had elite athletes for this, and they were using double blind. So neither the uh, researchers or people here really knew like what supplement they were giving, um, and they kind of want to look like, hey, how long will this effect work for? Basically, what they're looking at. They already knew there was some good research on like high intensity, um, and so they would give the group that they're intervening the bolus beforehand with a carbohydrate meal they provided. So that was pretty consistent. That was nice. They looked at the blood lactate, pH, and bicarbonate. Those all changed in the intervention group, and they associated that correlation with some causation, um, as we'll get to right here. Um, the interesting thing, though, is that the causation didn't go all the way. Pre-exercise, this is your bicarbonate group here that are highlighted. Um, they performed Fran faster. They did, but they didn't perform the row any faster. But they still had higher levels of bicarbonate floating around in their serum after Fran, and even after the rowing. So why didn't the rowing increase? Basically, these researchers said the rowing was so short, just like a minute or two, there really wasn't enough time for that buffer system to kind of do its thing. And they're probably pretty right on that. That's just the blood pH. We can skip past that. Um, the cool takeaways from here was they did have them do several familiarization rounds, so it was actually a pretty well performed study. They did take several different blood draws. It was actually really well done. But they didn't do females. There's only 17 people. That was kind of weak. They didn't really uh, monitor their sleep or diet closely, in which those could definitely cause a difference in the data. Real world application is they didn't have any GI distress, and it did improve kind of like this 5 minute strength slash anaerobic type of exercise. But doing maybe something longer than that maybe not be as beneficial. or as we'll see in another study, actually doing something maybe 20, 25 minutes long will then have time for that buffering effect to actually do its thing. All right, next one here. So this study is pretty cool because it kind of picks up the crumbs from the study we just talked about, that there's kind of some incongruency on pH levels doing stuff, lactate levels doing stuff, sodium bicarbonate levels all being observed and measurably different in the bicarbonate group, but they're still fatiguing at the same rate. And this is basically what this noticed here. They took, I mean, like Olympic level, these were like best of the best. Only 6, it was kind of weakness. They did the same kind of dosing strategies most everyone else does. This trial was basically looking at they could do a 6-second max sprint on the bike, cycle for 4 kilometers, so like a few minutes, and then at 105 VO2 max, kind of simulating like a mid-race pace, and then doing one more all-out sprint. They were most curious if they could affect this second, what they call post-power output too. They were most curious, can we affect that from bicarbonate? That was really what they wanted to know. And this is more data, it's cool, but we don't have time for all this. This was the way they did it. So they would kind of do this warm up, they would do a peak power, then they would measure their lactate, recovery rod, then 3 minute at this like high pace, and then one more sprint, and then they would measure afterwards. So the main takeaway from this study is that this is elite sprint, and this is elite endurance. That either this is bicarbonate, whether they took bicarbonate or whether they took placebo, their peak power output on that second sprint bout was the same. Their cadence was the same. Torque a little bit, but wasn't really even significant. A main weakness was, again, small power, no females, and it was done in a fasted state, which really isn't real life. And then even 75 minutes, they were fasting for 2 hours, took the bicarbonate bolus, and then had to wait another 75 minutes before they actually started this whole warm-up thing. So it's just like 4 hours by the time you probably actually got into um, the last sprint there. So what they found was, even though plasma acidosis was increasing, it wasn't really associated with a decrease in peak power output. So meaning they noticed, even though acidosis was being mitigated by bicarbonate, that really didn't make a difference in their performance. And that's what they were basically saying here. And their hypothesis, among many things, was just that they were so elite, their plasma bicarbonate levels were already higher than the highest normal persons, so they were probably already peaked out in their capacity in that pathway. Last one we'll look at here is sprint time. So it's basically a 25-minute time trial. Could we improve their performance in like a 25-minute like all-out effort? And in short, yes. And this was actually really simple, but a really good study. They only used 10 trained males. Again, no females. Sorry about that. But they were elite, 60 milliliters on the VO2 max. This was cool in the fact that all cyclists, they got tested 3 times, but they didn't know like what segment they were on. So they would do one test like on the placebo, they would do one test on one form of a sodium bicarbonate, and then they would do it. Their third test was on another type of bicarbonate. So they were investigating types of bicarbonate and placebo versus non. The cool main takeaway I think from this was, so they did 3 time trials apiece, and 8 out of 10 of them all got their slowest time when they were on the bicarbonate. So to me, that's a pretty strong data point there. Last little bit here. This again was done in a fasted state, but the researchers actually acknowledged kind of that shortcoming, because my assumption would be like, okay, these effects are probably not as pronounced maybe if they were in a fed state. So they said that would be a good thing to do, would be a redo the study. But the main takeaway is like, yeah, in a prolonged high intensity sport like this time trial lasting on average about 25 minutes, is it did reduce their race times, and they maintained higher outputs the whole study, the whole trial. All right, appreciate it.